friend Mike Farmer has done a brilliant job of showing we have a profit problem. You're probably all convinced. If that doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. But what I'd like to do is explore with you, what do we do about that? Certainly the workload problem is a big part of it. I'd like to explore that from a slightly different angle. And let's imagine you come into work in the morning and you discover that your margins aren't what they should be. You've got various levers to pull. This is the work of a recent McKinsey study. And so we could do something about our fixed costs. We could try and better control our variable costs. We could encourage our new business people to go out and do a better job of bringing in more accounts. That's volume. Or we could improve our pricing. Let's look at the effects that improving these various things would have on your profit margins. If we reduce our fixed costs by 1%, we can improve our profits by 3%. So yeah, it does help. If we reduce some salaries or do a staff reduction, does that help? Sure, we can improve our profit by 4% if we improve our fixed costs by 1%. What about more business? So that seems to always be the panacea, isn't it? Let's just go get more accounts. That does help, and it helps better than cost cutting, which is important to note. That's a 7% improvement. But look what happens when we pull that pricing lever. We improve our profit by 11%. Guys, there is nothing that we can do that is more powerful and more potent in improving our margins than improving our pricing and being more effective at our pricing. How do we do that? When I use the word pricing, I do not mean costing. Because I'm a career agency professional, I've spent my life in this business. I'm agency principal turned consultant, and I spent a lot of my years in doing what you do, not really pricing, but costing. We add up the amount of time we think something will take, and we turn that into a price that is not pricing. When you think about a definition for these two things, a price is really the value to the buyer, isn't it? That's what pricing is. Costing is us evaluating what our internal expense will be to provide a particular service. That's pretty different. You think about costing, that can be done on a calculator or a spreadsheet. That's part of the reason we like it because it looks precise. It's easy. We can build formulas into it. Pricing is a different thing. It's much more of a judgment, isn't it? It's the art part of the finance function inside agencies. You could think of costing as being fairly tactical. A lot of people can do it. It's production people are good at this. It's a tactical exercise. Pricing, that is a strategic level decision that must be centralized. I'll get into that a little bit later, and must be done by people who know what they're doing. Because I would submit that most of us are very good at costing. We've learned costing. We've been trained in costing. How many of us have ever really been trained in pricing? Is pricing a core competence of the agency in the same way that costing is? So we need. I'm not minimizing the importance of costing. We do need to know what our costs are, and we need to be very good at it. I would argue we need to be better at it, as Michael has argued. But pricing also needs to be done by people who know what they're doing. And let me show you a quick clip of a pricing professional. This is at the Marriott organization.
How often do you guys talk about room pricing at Marriott?
I talk about it all day, every day, sometimes in my sleep.
Do you ever misprice rooms?
Sure.
But how do you feel when that happens? You know you left
money on the table. There's money that we missed on the table. It hurts me. I feel physical pain.
You know what all your competitors are charging in every market?
Yes.
How do you know that?
We collect electronically every price point from every one of our competitor hotels every day around the world. We generally don't want to be the first hotel in a market to sell out. The best scenario is our competitor hotels sell out, and there is a lot of demand for now very limited supply, our remaining supply.
In other words, you can raise the rates.
We can raise the rates.
What happens if you're sold out and I'm a platinum member and I come walking through the door and I go to the front desk and I say, I need a room?
A lot of times hotels will save a couple rooms open just for last-minute platinums. Because if you think about it purely from the business standpoint, we don't ever want to turn a platinum away for any reason.
But they would tell other people that
In addition,
that they're sold out?
oh yeah,
If I called up, they'd say, sorry, sir, we don't have any
absolutely.
rooms available.
Absolutely.
Let me give you another scenario. I walk into the hotel, I go to the front desk, you have a few rooms available that night, and say, sir, room's going to be $300. I say, how about 200? Here's 200 bucks. Do you take it?
Never.
Why?
No way. That is called the fade, and that's something that
I mean, there's a term for that.
it's called the fade. Some competitors do it, although fewer and fewer do it. And the reason for it is, if you do that, you've just trained that customer. Don't book in advance.
You'd rather that room go empty for the entire night than give it to me for less than what you would otherwise charge?
Yes. Yes, and again, the reason for that is over time, you don't want to train customers to wait and feel like they can get a better deal.
So that's professional pricing. How'd you like to have that guy doing your pricing for you? I would. Because he eats, breathes, lives pricing, right? He's got someone else in the Marriott organization that's doing a similar job on the costing front. But his job is pricing. And in fact, there has been a global pricing revolution over the last 20 years. A lot of us in professional services haven't noticed it. It kind of has passed us by. We happen to be stuck in the same pricing paradigm that most of us were trained in going back several decades now. But in the rest of the business world, there has been a profound change in pricing with a lot of experimentation and innovation. For example, how many of you have been to Disneyland? Anyone recently? Okay, that's pretty good for a group of Brits. So even Disney has decided that there is a way to reinvent their pricing model at their theme parks, inspired by lots of interesting books. And I'd really encourage you to build a pricing reading list. I mean, the fact that we've got such good attendance today, I think, is indication that there is renewed interest in this question, and to read some of these pricing books would be a good first step for us to get better at what our clients are already so good at. You go to Disneyland now, and it is not a fixed price that is published in permanent letters on the billboard. It is, in fact, a changing dynamic price that depends on the time of the year, the time of the month, the day of the week, the time of the day, how crowded the park is. Those prices are constantly changing. This is dynamic pricing, which is certainly good for Disney, but it arguably is also good for the customer. You did this very thing at the Olympics here in 2012 with the very innovative pay-your-age pricing. So this wasn't this was ticket pricing based on how old you are, and that's a really interesting, innovative, and arguably fair way to price tickets for an event like that. You know about the business model behind Uber, and taken to the extreme, Uber now knows if you've got a low battery on your phone, and that would motivate us to want to pay a little bit more. They know that, and so that figures into their pricing model. In the US, the all-electric vehicle Tesla, if you ever have a chance to test drive a Tesla, do it. It's an incredible vehicle. They have a model where you buy a Tesla and the car has all of the mechanical components that you will ever need to take full advantage of what Tesla has to offer, but only some of them have been unlocked. As you want more of the features of the Tesla, you can buy them and they are unlocked via software, actually as an iPhone download. So how's that for innovative pricing on an automobile? B2B, industrial, jet engines. Can you innovate in pricing there? Of course you can. Here's Rolls-Royce, and instead of charging for a jet engine, a piece of machinery, they are pricing what they call uninterrupted flying time. That's what they sell to their clients. That is turning a piece of industrial equipment into an interesting statement of value provided to the customer, isn't it? So this can be done in B2B I think it's safe to say we could do this in professional services and certainly in a creative business like advertising. And there is now finally a pricing revolution in our business. If you look at most of the startups in our business here in the States, other parts of the world, a lot of the best ones have an innovative component when it comes to remuneration and pricing and compensation. For example, this is John Bond of Kirschenbaum Bond fame in New York, whose new business model is that very thing. And here in the UK, I read just a few weeks ago about Brain Juicer and their promise to have a guaranteed ROI for all their client engagements. So that certainly factors into the value equation when it comes to their pricing, doesn't it? So this revolution actually has been happening over time, as I said, and it has followed a path that I'd like to just review with you, because if you think about different pricing paradigms, the mental maps we bring to our jobs about, well, what is pricing? And for many of us who've been in this business a long time, our mental map is, well, pricing is, we walk around with a clipboard and ask people how many hours they intend to spend on a project, and we total it up and we tack on a 15-20% margin, and that's pricing. Well, that's a form of pricing. It is arguably the least inventive, oldest, least innovative form of pricing. It's called cost plus. It's cost-based. And most businesses have moved on beyond that as a paradigm. They moved to competitor-based, which is at least looking outside to the market and employing strategies like skim pricing, penetration pricing to compete more effectively in the marketplace. But the highest order, and where all the examples I've shown you so far, and where Marriott and others is in what I call customer-based pricing. Now you'll notice one of the subpoints here is value-based, and I've actually stopped using the term value-based because I think it's so misleading. I think it connotes, the term connotes that it must be PBR, performance-based, and of course that is a form of value-based pricing, but it is not the same thing as value-based pricing. Value-based means that you are pricing based on the value to the customer, the utility received to the customer. You're pricing the customer, not the service. That's what customer-based pricing is. And so the other axis here at the bottom is our ability to be good at pricing, our competency, our pricing competency. And if we haven't studied pricing, if all we have in our firms is finance and accounting, we don't really practice pricing. So we're in this first unfortunate quadrant of cost-based, fairly weak competency in pricing. That's where many firms are currently stuck. As we get better at developing pricing as a competency like our client organizations have done, we can migrate from being a price taker, which is how I think a lot of us feel now in negotiations with clients, to moving beyond even price follower and being price makers. In the creative services industry, we ought to be at the forefront of being price makers, because pricing, unlike costing, is an art form. It's an art form. Costing is a science. Pricing is an art. And we ought to be the ones who are inventing the kind of pricing that Tesla is using. And we can certainly do that in various categories and for various clients. The cost plus model is appropriate for manual work. It's appropriate for even possibly part of our business. Mike was saying we are largely factories and we don't realize it, and I believe that's true. There's a big part of our business that is in fact a factory, and that's the production, implementation, execution, part of what we do. The IPA did a white paper years ago that I found really interesting, arguing that we're in the magic and the logic business. That the logic is the factory business. Magic is the garden, because I think there's a garden and a factory under our roofs. We do both things. The factory piece, okay, you want to unit price that. That is more appropriate because these are widely available kinds of work that have industry specifications, and they're fairly standardized. Resizing a banner ad, is that factory or garden? That's pretty clearly factory. But that approach is not at all appropriate for the garden part of what we do. It is not appropriate for knowledge work. Peter Drucker, years ago, wrote about the nature of knowledge work and how what we do in knowledge work cannot be compared has no relevance to time. The amount of time it takes to do something in knowledge work, or the amount of time it takes to solve a problem, does not equate to the value of the solution, does it? There are many, many examples we could go through if I had a lot more time here, and examples that happen to you every single day of your lives in your firms. We say that the only place time spent should matter is in prison. It doesn't matter in knowledge work. It's not relevant in knowledge work. The 5 minutes that a brilliant creative director can spend to solve a complex business problems because he or she is a brilliant creative director who's spent 20 or 30 years in the business and has a lot of category experience. It's a 5-minute solution. Should 5 minutes go on the timesheet? What a ridiculous notion. Of course not. And yet, if all you have is the timesheet to guide your pricing, that's the wrong tool for pricing knowledge work. So, assuming that you're here today because you agree with the idea that our pricing is suboptimal, and it certainly needs to be fixed, whose job is it to fix it? Let me give you 3 choices. Is it the industry? Is it Tom Lewis and the IPA? Is it their job? And certainly Tom and the IPA are doing a great job by doing things like this conference and talking this up. So maybe it's the industry. Is it the buyer? Is it your client? Is it your client's job to change your pricing? Now you know what the third choice is going to be. Or is it you? Could it possibly be you? Could it be the seller? It is the seller. Guys, it's the seller's job to change pricing, not the buyer's, not the industry, not the association. Tesla didn't wait for General Motors and Ford. They would have waited till hell freezes over to change their pricing model. They didn't get permission from the American Automobile Association. They just did it. Pricing innovations happen at the seller level, and by the way, they happen with individual sellers, not sellers banding together and making blood pacts and, okay, all right, all together now we're going to abandon the hourly rate. You don't need to do that. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen one innovative agency at a time, and that is indeed what is happening. And in fact, sellers change pricing strategies all the time, and they go out and they re-educate us. It happens in many industries. You remember how you used to buy software? Little shrink-wrap box with a price tag on it. Remember that? So Adobe says, well, we think there's a better way, there's a better pricing model for that, and now we license Adobe software, don't we? We don't actually own it. We license it, and we pay them an annual fee. It's kind of a brilliant strategy. It's not a one-time purchase anymore. So we've been re-educated by the software industry on how to buy software. Airlines have done a magnificent job of this. We used to have a standard fixed price that included everything, and now I think Ryanair, I understand, is maybe the master of unbundling everything. Even if you want to use the toilet while you're on the plane, you pay extra. So they have re-educated all the flying public, haven't they, on how to deal with airlines on pricing. Even parking. I mean, here's an example of innovation in pricing where we used to pay a fixed price to park, and now if you go, you would know this, driving to Heathrow, the price on the parking changes based on how full the lot is. So they teach us that we need to be early if we want to get a good price on parking. And yes, even in professional services. Here is LegalZoom in the States, which offers legal services to small business. And so rather than, we'll keep track of our time in 6-minute increments and send you a bill, with LegalZoom, you're quoted a fixed price and you charge it to your credit card for wills, trademark searches, the kinds of things that are fairly easily done. So we can re-educate our clients, our buyers. It's not out of the ordinary. So the question on the table is, are the professional sellers on our side and the professional buyers on the client side, is that a fair match? Is that an even match? And I want to just take a look at what we're dealing with on the client side, because, as you know, these guys are very well educated. They go to pricing conferences, they go to pricing trade shows, they go to pricing seminars, pricing webinars, they read purchasing books. They are certified, they have letters that appear behind their names, they take exams and tests. I mean, this is a discipline that is taken very seriously by purchasing and procurement professionals at the client organizations. And what is the equivalent for us on our side? As I said, we've got people doing a very good job on the finance side, but do we have a direct equivalent on the professional selling side? The procurement industry is morphing. If you go to some of these conferences and you listen to some of the presentations, you will hear a different language now, even from procurement, about what they're trying to achieve. And I'm just going to show you a quick clip from the Chief Procurement Officer, Coca-Cola, North America.
We, in procurement at Coca-Cola, had tried to approach marketing, or creative even, as if we were buying any other commodity, right? So we had experience, dozens of years, decades of experience in buying commodities. So whether it was aluminum bottles, corn, sugar, fuel, anything that you might think of, approached it exactly the same way. We had a very linear approach, whether you have 5 steps, 7 steps, 9 steps, whatever you have. When we applied it to the marketing organization and said, procurement is here to add value for you, the equation didn't add up. People were not happy. We weren't actually getting it or understanding what the situation is. And what we needed to do first was reframe for success. So a linear process was not going to work. This is about total value creation. So it's really important that we stop talking about some words like, okay, well, we're going to go out to bid for agencies, because that creates almost an allergic reaction, a tissue rejection. It's really more about, how do I actually derive value end to end holistically? And this could be more about speed to market. It could be more about innovation. It could be more about new products. It could be more about breakthrough technology than it is about fees or rates.
Okay, so as Mike said, clients are clearly in a cost-cutting mode for good reason. Brand growth has been stagnant for more than a decade now. But do you hear this language she's using? Value, end-to-end value, holistic value, the value equation, shared value. The reason the marketing community is interested in paying us differently, and they are very interested in that, by the way, their motivation is not to cut costs. They do need to cut costs. They would like to cut costs, but their main motivation in paying us differently is they need to achieve better business results. And they know the current system doesn't provide a very good incentive to their business partners to do that. So they're very interested in changing the compensation system with agencies. So what happens if we've got these very highly trained, skilled buyers, and we put them across the table from a junior account director? Not a real fair match. We don't really have the same level of training and understanding and sophistication. But we can make it a fair match. We can absolutely do that by committing to making not just costing and accounting and finance a core competency, but making pricing a core competence. At your client organizations, you have people whose full-time job, like our Marriott example, is just pricing. That's what they do for a living. Could we have that equivalent in our firms? My answer is yes, and that we absolutely must have that. We must develop that as a competency. I'm going to give you a bit of a framework for doing that. Let me suggest quickly 7 ways that we can make pricing more of a competency right now. The first is to get out of this idea that we should go in and sell and present and negotiate our costs. It's kind of a ridiculous idea, isn't it, when you hear it in those terms? We have 3 choices when we decide that we are going to charge for our services. We can decide to charge for our inputs, which are in fact our costs. These are hours, activities, efforts. And this is in fact the current model at most firms. A little more progressive way to think about what we could sell is, well, we could instead sell the outputs, what our inputs produce. This, I think, would be equivalent to Mike's scope metric units. And in a way, it's selling deliverables, an actual defined workload, irrespective of the inputs. But of course, the highest value that we can bring to a client organization is providing them with outcomes, results, marketplace effects, because this is ultimately what a buyer buys, isn't it? The buyer buys the utility of what we do, not the actual product or service. So by adopting that, this is what professional pricers do in a negotiation, in a discussion with a buyer, is they come in starting at the top of this pyramid, not at the bottom. And of course, we make the opposite mistake. Professional pricers are careful about the language they use. Behavioral psychologists teach that language is always a precursor to behavior change. If we want to change our behavior, we first have to change our language. So there's a whole list of bad words that I would like you to stop saying. They're up here. Cost, estimate, hours, rates, billable time, labor, utilization, time of staff. What is that? That's all the language of cost. Those are the language of inputs. This is not actually what your client buys. We've taught them to buy it. We've trained them to buy it. We did this, by the way. This system was not imposed on us. This is our system that we taught them. And this is why it's now time for us to teach them something different. We can use completely different language, and you can retrain yourself. It's kind of difficult. It took me several years when I went through my own little personal pricing revolution, and it took me a while to avoid using all these other words that I was so used to saying. But when we say price instead of cost, when we talk talent instead of hours, when we talk about results and solutions and value and metrics of success and accountability instead of utilization and FTEs, that communicates what we're really trying to sell. A pricing professional wants to go into a negotiation and align the economic incentives of the buyer and the seller. They want to understand what is good for the seller so that we can align that with what's also good for the buyer. We'll start what's good with the buyer so that we can align that with what's good for the seller. Now, by the way, the system we have right now is completely misaligned, isn't it? It's misaligned. Because what the buyer wants less of, hours, we want more of. That's classic misalignment. There are ways to align it. I've got an interesting example up here, and many more if we had more time, with interesting skin-in-the-game, results-oriented kinds of arrangements that are very aligned. We have taught our clients to care intensely about cost, and so they answer ever increasingly intrusive, irrelevant questions about our costs and our overhead structure And it's our job, that's their job, because they're trying to get the best price for our work. But our job is to try and turn that dialogue away from cost to what I call transparency of expectations. Our job is to go in and before there's any discussion of scope of work, say, we'd like to talk about scope of value. We'd like to begin this dialogue by talking about your expectations, your objectives, your desired outcomes. What does success look like? Could we start there? And we'll get the scope of work. But if we don't know the scope of value, the scope of work could be completely wrong. We need to know the scope of value. I mentioned this just a few minutes ago. This is Garden Factory, Magic Logic. There are different classes of work that we provide. And this is important for us to realize because these two classes have to be priced differently. The worst idea we've ever had was the blended rate. Really bad idea. Because it undercharges for the high value work, overcharges for the low value work. And instead what we need to do, and you've heard this word, there's a client word for this, we need to decouple our two classes of work. And I'd argue there may be sometimes three different classes of work that we do that all are attached different value in the mind of the client. This is an incredibly powerful tool that you can use tomorrow. You can use this afternoon. You can leave this conference and go back to your firms and say, yeah, I'm going to try this. And this is the idea that we should never, ever just quote a single price to our clients. We should always give them a choice of yeses. We should always give them options. Do you remember the last time you signed up for a software service? What did you see on that final screen? You're ready to make your choice. What do you see? Is there just one price there? No. There are always options, usually 3. Something magic about that, sometimes 4. But almost always at least 3 options. Why do professional pricing organizations do this? Because they know the power of options. They know that it changes the dialogue away from how long will this take to which of these options do you prefer? Which of these do you think would work best for you? It changes the dialogue away from inputs to outputs, outcomes, and it's incredibly powerful. There are a lot more we could say about this. And this should be obvious to us in this business because we're doing this for our clients every day and we're applying objective out-of-the-box problem solving to our clients' business. Could we apply the same kind of creativity to how we get paid? If we took 1% of the time and energy that we spend in new business spec development and applied that to what's a creative way we could get paid by this client, do you think we'd do a better job of pricing and improving our margins? Indeed, we would. In fact, in a lot of the workshops we do with agencies, we do these thought experiments that are sometimes just these short bursts of time, which demonstrate, well, wow, yeah, just by taking that concept that the hourly rate is the only way we can get paid, by setting that aside and pretending it doesn't exist and applying some other creative thought to this, there are lots of different ways that we can extract value from a client relationship, and you'll have that experience the first time you do it. So on the client side, they certainly have a structure that supports the purchasing, procurement part of their business. They have people with those titles. They have a chief procurement officer. What do we have on our side? Because I would say the equivalent is not finance. The equivalent to a CPO at the client is not the CFO at our organization, because that is a different job. I'm looking for the pricing competency, not the accounting competency. You see the difference? At TBWA Chiat Day, they have a CFO and a CPO, both chief pricing officer, who does a different job. One is about counting and accounting, making sure that we're doing a good job of counting our costs and allocating our resources. But the other is a different job, trying to ascertain value and applying creative thinking to pricing. So another way that this can take form inside agencies, and this is actually more practical, I think, for smaller firms, is this idea that we like a lot of a pricing council. And this is a small group of senior executives in the agency, not necessarily from finance. This can be a creative director, this can be an account director, this can be anyone in the firm that is naturally good at pricing. And I think you know what I mean. I had a partner once who was just so naturally talented at being able to walk into a client and saying, yeah, that's going to be, and he'd quote double what I thought we were going to charge, and he'd get it. Just naturally good at pricing. Those are the kinds of people you want on a pricing council. And the kinds of things they do, they identify, champion the multiple dimensions of value that you create for your clients, because the value you create is deep and multifaceted. It's not articulated in an hourly rate at all. There are lots of different forms of value. And the Coca-Cola procurement person articulated a few. Speed to market. That's a value that is not going to show up in an hourly rate. Experimenting with various pricing approaches to maximize profits, and here's a concept we preach: diversify your pricing portfolio. We don't want, just like in your personal financial portfolio where you're saving for retirement, you don't just have gold or just international stocks, not just one thing. You have a diversified portfolio. That's what we want inside a professional firm, is a diversified pricing portfolio, because what is that going to produce for you? Overall, much, much better returns. That's just the nature of portfolio diversification. The Pricing Council develops tools that keeps the firms focused on value, not cost, including changing the language, going through every single document you have in your firm and striking the word cost and estimate, and if it's a client-facing document, none of that language of cost should ever appear on it. We want the language of value. Overseeing the development of pricing options. We talked about the power of options and presenting those proposals to current and prospective clients. We only want the best, like you only want your best presenters showing creative work, right? You only want your best presenters at new business. You only want your best pricers presenting pricing. You don't want your pricing wimps attending a price negotiation just because they happen to work on the account. You want your very best. Creating new revenue streams by cultivating, packaging, monetizing the incredible amount of intellectual capital and intellectual property that exists in your firms. That's an additional revenue stream that I imagine many of you here are starting to experiment with. So let me just finish with one more thought. When we're treating pricing as its own discipline and walking into a negotiation with a client, we are too often stuck in this idea of negotiating something that your buyer wants to minimize. What does your buyer want to minimize? Well, they want to minimize the cost, don't they? Could we talk about something that both parties want to maximize? And what would that be? Well, here's the cost piece. And no doubt we have to be good at cost. We need to know what our cost is. Here's price. And if we've done a good job, we set our price above our cost, right? Because that is our profit. That's the seller's profit. But there's a third bar that's not up here yet. What is it? Value. This is what the client really buys. They don't buy our cost. And the price is just a means to an end, isn't it? And the end is they buy our value. Notice that the value chart bar is higher than the price bar. We also want to do that because you know what that is? That's what economists call the buyer's profit. In an economic transaction, in a successful economic transaction, both parties need to make a profit, the buyer and the seller. And the way we give the buyer a profit is by constructing and offering even more value than the price. Now, when a pricing professional approaches a pricing negotiation, they're looking for this shared value. And they start from the exact opposite place that most of us do. Because where do we start? We start with the cost. We add up our costs, we turn that into a price, and we hope that has value. The professional pricing approach would start on the far right with the question of, what's the value of what we're about to do for this client? What would be the value in many different dimensions to this client? Great, let's let that dictate our price, and now let's figure out what our costs are. Exactly backwards. It's called the difference between the cost-led pricing and the price-led costing schools of pricing. And in professional services, we're stuck in this old paradigm of doing it backwards. The rest of the companies that are in the pricing revolution start with the question of value and work their way back. And that is the key to professional pricing success. So I'll leave it there, and enjoyed being with you today. And please keep up the dialogue. I really encourage that there's so many here that are interested in this topic of becoming better at pricing. Thanks very much.